Hey everybody, welcome to Blog Talk Radio, the Sales Professional Network, TSPN. I'm your host, Andre Harrell. This is Blog Talk Radio's first and only show dedicated to the needs of the sales professional. Regardless of the industry, if you're in the sales business, this channel is just for you. We focus on topics that are relevant to all industries. And the commonality is that we in the sales business as sales professionals face similar challenges each and every day. TSPN was designed to create a forum where we can discuss these challenges and come up with some solutions and best practices to meet those challenges. This show is brought to you by AH Square and Beyond Consulting. That's AH2 and Beyond.com, delivering beyond our clients' expectations in sales strategies, marketing, and sales training. AH Square and Beyond, increasing your competency means increasing your sales results. For those of you listening to tonight's show and would like to join in on the discussion, you can call in. The number to call in is 347-838-9979. Press the number 1 on your keypad. That'll notify me in the switchboard that you have a question, and I'll get you on right away. And if you'd like to participate in our chat room, that's there, too, for you as well. You know, I have to start out tonight's program with reading to you a response that I received today in a discussion group when I posted the question, why do leaders fail at managing crisis? And here was the answer to that. IMHO, which is an acronym for in my humble opinion. I'm not sure why our society has dealt with and is so used to doing these acronyms, you know, LOL, laugh out loud, OMG, oh my God. I digress, but I think it's a late way out. But anyway, let me repeat. The person said, IMHO, in my humble opinion, it is because leaders, quote unquote, are sock puppets. Most are there to take the hit when something is badly messed up that requires some blood must be spilled to appease the gods or masters, quote unquote. Now, I'm not saying that this is the sentiment or perspective of most people. However, as I stated to the author of this comment, I'm not quite sure I totally disagree with this tongue-in-cheek comment because, you know, if you have seen cases where the person placed in charge is so incompetent in terms of their behavior and actions when they're confronted with a crisis that you do think to yourself that this person has been propped strategically in this situation to take the fall. And there must be a much bigger picture here or some people behind the scenes that really are actually at fault. So when I came up with this topic, I hadn't thought of that angle. But clearly this does happen when you see people placed in roles that they are not clearly prepared for. And we're going to talk about a lot about that tonight on tonight's program. I would like to welcome back our previous guests that we've had on the show to discuss this phenomenon, why do leaders fail at managing crisis. And I'd like to introduce Walter Hoff, who is the owner of Development First, LLC. Walter's last appearance was on the show when we talked about sales managers who give the excuse, there's no time to develop my people. So if you get a chance, you can go back and listen to that show in its full entirety. It's in the archives function in Blog Talk Radio, and it happened to be one of my best shows. So as a selfish plug, please go back and visit that show. It really was a good one. So welcome back, Walter.
No pressure, Andre. Thank you. So glad to be here. Glad to be talking about this topic. I think you and I have a lot of passion around this, and hopefully a lot of the listeners will call in tonight and express some of their viewpoints too.
Yeah, I hope so too. This is a subject that I think you hear a lot about in in the media in terms of, because we keep getting these examples of poor leadership in the midst of crisis. The most recent one I think everyone can kind of recognize is the Concordia cruise ship, where the captain thought it was a good decision, wise decision to kind of save his butt first versus really looking out for the passengers on the ship. And we've seen a lot of other examples, the BP oil spill and how that wasn't handled in the best of way from a leadership standpoint too as well. But I'd like to really start out the show by just having you just kind of dive right in and provide your thoughts, Walter, on this whole subject. Why do you think leaders fail at managing crisis? What's your beginning thoughts of that subject?
Let me start off by saying I'm going to make a delineation probably throughout the whole show of, one, a natural or unexpected crisis. Example would be Japan earthquake. The other one, Andre, to me, is a crisis that leaders cause, that through their actions or inactions, they cause or make worse. Let me give you a good example. This is very recent. This incensed me last week. Paula Deen, the cook, she's on the cooking show.
Yeah, I'm familiar with her.
Yeah. Well, we need to talk about that because I was enraged last week about that. That, to me, is something that a leader causes and then exacerbates. So, first of all, that's my delineation. Regardless of what type of crisis it is, I think, and let's use Paula Deen, her silence. So I'm going to put up number one. When a crisis hits or a leader causes a crisis, it's because a lot of times they don't say anything, right? And so now you got people speculating and wondering and waiting, because after all, who are you following? The leader. So now you're not hearing anything. Now you're really wondering. You get distracted. You get unfocused. No good. Another thing I see commonly, leaders don't admit that they're at fault, or they blame other people. Okay?
Yeah.
Blame other people. Mm-hmm. Another thing I see happen is that they don't apologize. The BP oil spill, who didn't want to wring that gentleman's neck? Because he was concerned about him partying more than the environment and how he was causing all this harm to the environment. And he was very slow to react and never really, in my mind, apologized for what happened. Didn't take any ownership or responsibility. Here's something else. Waiting too long to respond. Yeah. And I'm sure we're going to get into several examples of that tonight. And my last one is they continue to take the big salary or bonuses while their actions or inactions cause their workers to be laid off, workers that are making maybe 1/200th of their salary or more, right? Mm-hmm. Not to mention workers who don't get all the perks that they do. So that's it, Andre. So let's roll.
Yeah, I want to go back because my first question kind of stems off from what you just said regarding what is the biggest mistake, and quite frankly, you gave a number of them, which I thought was very important. But the one that you said that really stands out to me that I want to concentrate a little bit on is this whole idea of silence. Now, they do say, to kind of reflect, you don't panic, you don't run around with your head cut off when in the midst of a crisis. And, you always hear, Walter, the best approach is a steely approach, the silent leader, which is, let me step back, let me reflect, let me figure out what's going on here, and then I'll make my action while everything else is on fire. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like, let me take a deep breath and figure out what's going on. So, give me your thoughts on this whole idea of silence, because that's the big one, as I see, is the inactivity and, this whole idea of, you just don't jump in head first. Kind of, navigate what's going on, then you act. And I know most recently in the media, they always say that the PR people and the people that, have responsibility for PR and the CEO or the person in charge is always don't go to the media yet. Don't say anything. Mm-hmm. Let's get our bearings together and let's do something. And then we're shouting, "Where is the captain?" or "Where's the leader?" What are they doing here? So, give me your thoughts on this whole idea of this whole, let's kind of be silent first.
Yeah. I don't totally agree with it. I understand it though.
Yeah.
Here's what I like to hear somebody say after, something hits, a big crisis hits. We're working on it. We're coming up with a plan. We want to think it through first before we spell it out.
Right.
I would like someone to say that. Now, people can disagree with me, because depending on what the crisis is, some crises you have to take immediate action, right? And that gets in one of your other questions we'll get to later about preparation. But I would like to hear, if you can't say something right away, tell us you're planning, you're thinking about it, and you're going to come forward soon, and you got to do it real soon, with a plan.
Yeah, I agree. And before we move on, let me just remind everybody, please, if you'd like to call into this discussion, which I'm sure many of you are biting at the chip to kind of come in, the number is 347-838-9979. It is important that you press the number 1 on your keypad. That'll notify me that your hand is raised, and I'll get to you immediately. You know, it's what do we pay, quite frankly, you know, the PR people to do? And they always say that you do come out immediately and not necessarily tell everybody what you're doing, because that could probably possibly cause more harm than good, Walter, but at least let everybody know that we have things under control.
Yes.
and the silence doesn't mean that, you know, everything is in chaos and nobody's kind of steering the ship. And I agree with you. You know, just at least come out and say, hey, look, we understand what's going on. And, you know, I think you found that to be the case in the BP oil spill, because the media, quite frankly, ran the PR function, and the media didn't know what was going on. So you had really nobody from BP kind of step up and say, okay, this is what's taking place, really in a cogent manner. You had several people from BP give different stories, but you never had this whole consistent message. And that kind of brings me back to my next message in terms of the consistent message. You know, when you come out and you've got a number of people kind of wanting to, quote unquote, I shouldn't say this, but it's probably true, want to shine in a situation like this, how important is it to have one single message? What's your thoughts on that?
I love this thought, and I think it's very important to have one person be that messenger, because I think we've all seen situations where there have been more than one person, and each person is not aligned with each other. And so what does that cause? It just causes more confusion, more consternation, more lack of focus, more fear. So, yeah, I totally agree. One person should be the spokesperson.
You don't see that much, and it's something that I would say would probably be a very important, I guess, first step from a tactical standpoint. The other thing I want to ask you, what do you suggest are ways, you know, one in a leadership position can manage crisis? Now, I know, you know, you see, you know, you can go to any bookstore or any type of, you know, online type of program and get all, and believe me, you can get so many comments and opinions on how do you manage a crisis. I mean, MBA schools are built on, you know, learning how to kind of get through these type of things. Not necessarily wanting to pin you in the corner, Walter, and say, what is the one golden nugget thing you should do? Because I don't think that's, quite frankly, possible to just say there's one dynamic that meets every type of situation if you're in a crisis situation. But if you can kind of chew on that and think, you know, what is probably one or two, maybe some ways one who's in a leadership position can manage a crisis? What would be the first steps you would take?
We actually talked about one of them already, and I think number one for me is speak immediately. And like I said earlier, if you don't have the plan right then and there, let people know you're working on the plan and you're going to have it to them shortly. Let people know, like, I'm on the case. I see, my team sees what's going on. We don't like it. You know, if your team's at fault, apologize for it and say, you know, folks, we're going to make it right. We'll come back to you shortly. I think that's number one. And then when you have the plan, outline all the steps as clearly as you can. And to your great point, Andre, I think that's one person doing that while the other people are behind the scenes, spreading the communication afterwards.
Right.
And making it consistent so everyone's on the same page and everyone hears the same message. And then accept responsibility, even if it's not your doing. And here's something else. I mentioned this earlier in the BP. I don't even know his name. I was so crazed about him. Right? Apologize.
Right.
Which kind of gets to a customer service tenet. You know, when customers are irate, right, and, you know, we've all been there, you and I have been in sales, and, you know, our clients and customers aren't happy, one of the first things we were always taught to do is, you know, align with them, which could mean an apology, even if it wasn't your fault. Because you represent the company, and in some cases, you know, we have leaders who represent their states or their cities or their countries. So I think all these things are important here.
You know, I want to kind of reflect on something you just said when you talked about apologize, because you said it more than a couple of times, and I missed it the first time, and I kind of want to go back to that. You know, I've brought this word or this term up in several shows, and I think it applies in this situation, and that's the word humility. Because, you know, just coming up front and saying, hey, look, you know, we made some mistakes. We apologize about that. We're working very hard behind the scenes to correct the problem, you know, blah, 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 and we're going to move forward. But I think oftentimes, you know, these people in these roles feel that it's sometimes, Walter, a sense of weakness to come out and say, I did something wrong. And then you also said something that is a challenge for most people that are in roles like that, is to, you know, say we were at fault, but in the same time, I'm fully under control. Because the perception is if I come out and say, well, I'm sorry, we're at fault, we did this by accident, to them, it comes across as them telling themselves and telling everybody else out there, I'm incompetent. And so there's that tendency again to say, look, this wasn't my fault. I apologize. It was the janitor's fault. It was somebody else's fault. So it's this idea of deflecting because you're not taking accountability. And so we could probably spend the rest of the night in the show just based on this one situation, because you see this all the time. It's not my fault. Well, wait a minute. Aren't you in charge? Yeah, but I didn't know. It's like the whole Rupert Murdoch. Remember the Rupert Murdoch deal?
Yes.
I'm not really on top of everything. So I've got people to kind of address that. But you're in charge.
Right.
you should know this. So, you know, I totally agree with you. I think this whole idea of being humble and just showing a little bit of humility by apologizing is so important. There's another angle I want to ask you. My mother actually brought this up to me not too long ago, and I really couldn't give her an answer. So of course I said I got to ask my man Walter this. How do you predict someone's ability to kind of manage crisis? And I know this opens up a whole ball of wax here, because how can you look at someone? I mean, I know we've got a lot of, you know, programs and training type of programs and development programs to kind of, I guess, really microscopically look at people's ability to be able to handle situations like this. But how do you predict someone's ability to kind of manage a crisis?
This may be an oversimplification, but I believe you put them in a position so they have to, and particularly before they become a manager. So this gets back to that, and this gets back to some of the things we talked about last show around development. You know,
right.
Having a process in place to expose people to where they're put in a leadership position before they get there, and if they are not solely responsible when the crisis hits, you bring them in when there is a crisis, and you say, let's work together now. How would you handle this? And then you show them by example how you would actually handle it, you know, from the communication on down. So I think you can do that prior to them becoming a manager. And then there are things, and I know you went through this, where you go through these manager simulations.
Right.
And part of the simulation is usually, it may not be a crisis to the magnitude of the things we've already talked about, but it could be certainly, you know, something that could make or break the organization. And it could be some decisions that, if not made or made, could lead to a crisis. And so putting somebody in a simulation like that, you get a chance to see, you know, how they think, why they think, and you get a chance to coach them at that point so that when they do step into a manager's role, they've already had some training.
Let me ask you, just kind of reflect on that. Do you find there are corporations that don't do that? You know, without bringing up the company that I previously worked with, that we both previously worked for, but, you know, there are companies out there that actually send you through those type of programs, these simulation-type training programs, to get you ready for that. But, you know, you got to think there are companies out there that don't do that. and they just assume that, you were very, talented and successful in your prior position, and you've demonstrated some leadership ability, so you are designated now in charge of a specific unit. But then when the proverbial stuff hits the fan, that all things get to be chaotic. So why do you see companies not spending a lot of time in this area from a development training standpoint, Walter?
Oh, boy. It starts to get back to what we talked about a couple of weeks ago here now, is that there's a short-sightedness to say, well, we need the numbers, we need their results, and, we'll judge them in terms of their future to lead people based on that. And these are the companies that sometimes do not put people through any type of training so that they can prepare best to just not crisis, but just to lead people in general.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. Reminder, if you'd like to call in, if you have a question, the number is 347-838-9979. Please press the number 1 on your keypad. That'll notify me that your hand is raised, and I'll get to you immediately. I guess there are ways, and as I mentioned just a second ago, there are ways that one can prepare themselves for a crisis. But I think you'll agree, Walter, that, when things do hit unexpectedly, I'm not quite sure you're totally prepared for it. You may think it's going to come sooner or later, but when it happens, it's probably at the worst time when you're not thinking about it or you're not ready for it. Are there ways that you can think of that would prepare somebody for something to happen that is probably unexpected? I mean, how when things are going well, I guess is a better way of kind of asking this question. When things are going great, do you think in the back of your head, okay, something could go sideways tomorrow? How do I prepare for that? So should it always be in the mental Rolodex that you should prepare for a crisis around the corner? I guess if you get that question.
Yeah. My thinking, and it may not be like others, is yes, you should. When things go too well, I start getting a little nervous, like, okay, when's the shoe going to drop? But I've seen, in thinking about this, I go back to my days when I was a pharmaceutical rep, and I covered Manhattan, and I covered offices, doctors' offices, I covered pharmacies, and I covered hospitals. And I remember the days when I used to go into Bellevue, or I used to go into NYU, when I used to go into Harlem, and I remember those times when I saw disaster drills taking place.
Oh, yeah.
And so when we had 9/11 that day, when my mind cleared, because, all of us were really foggy for several hours around that whole thing, Yeah. When my mind finally cleared, guess what I went back to? I said, wow, I remembered those disaster drills, and then I said, wow, today is the day they're actually executing some of the things that I saw them do. And then it was kind of, surreal, kind of frightening thought, but I think you can prepare. Now that is, maybe an extreme case, but it's an important case in our history to bring up. So take any other disaster. Take some natural disasters. Can we prepare to keep people safe in some of these disasters? Yeah. Did the Japanese do what they could? And I'm talking about those in charge. When they had those unfortunate trilogy of things happen last March, where they had the tsunami, the earthquake, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think they were really open and honest with their people in terms of the danger of, all the emissions into the air of really toxic gases. I still today don't think that they were really upfront with their people and really did all they could to protect their people through that. So that's a disaster that everybody should be preparing for. I would hope that this country, and I know after that happened, there were alarm bells in this country to say, oh, we better get prepared. Well, there's certain things you can do just in case that same thing could happen here.
Yeah, it's that old analogy. You know, if you're going to live off of an ocean, and you know that this ocean sometimes is volatile and can flood your house, then you know going in before you buy the house that there's probably some preparation that we have to put in place, knowing that this possibly could occur. So it kind of goes back to, stuff does happen, and we need to prepare for it, although it's kind of like if it doesn't happen, that's good news, but if it does happen, we put every precaution in place from a planning standpoint to make sure that we get through it successfully, and kind of goes back to your situation. It's just preparing. And I totally agree. I used to think the same way. Boy, this is kind of strange. I'm having the good times are here for a long, long time. So it's kind of like you got to like want to celebrate and be happy because good things are happening, but you're always thinking, okay, if something not so good happens, I have to be able to react appropriately to it. So you've given one example of a best practice or a good example of how you deal with crisis. Are there any other examples that I know you and I talked about? One good example that I can certainly bring up, but I'll guess to see if you bring it up. But do you have like a good example of how a crisis was managed effectively?
I mentioned 9/11, so let's go back to that. As difficult as all that was that day, and just not in New York City, but in Washington and out in Pennsylvania, not far from where I live here, just the response. And I focus on New York City because obviously there was the greatest loss of life. Just the way that, and I was never a big fan of then Mayor Rudy Giuliani, but the way he handled that, from number one, the communication. He was constantly visible. He was constantly on the news. He was constantly providing updates. The way he interacted with all the service providers, the police, the firemen, the hospitals, and all the rescue efforts that were going on, I think it was outstanding. And then afterward, he attended just about every funeral of every policeman and fireman and worker that was involved. He was constantly there. So I think that, for me, stands out as an outstanding show by him and others. I mean, there are a lot of other people. Usually, as you and I talk, there's one person at the lead, at the helm, but there's a lot of other people in the background that's supplying him information like that. And that was a really, to me, good concerted effort there.
I remember that time vividly. They literally wanted to shove Bush out of office and put Giuliani in. He was considered a hero, and that is a great example of dealing with and managing crisis effectively. Here's one that I'm sure you thought of, but I think you volleyed it over to me, and it's the Tylenol scare. To this day, that is probably, and from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, Walter, that whole process and how it was managed is right now is an MBA school at Harvard, how to manage crisis, the whole Tylenol scare, and the decision to pull all the Tylenol off the shelves once it was learned that the bottles were being tampered with. And I just thought, there's a situation where you really look to your vision and what you're all about from an integrity standpoint, from a credibility standpoint, by saying, you know what, our patients are first and our customers are first. We're not looking at our bottom line figures at this point in time. We want to keep everybody safe, and we don't care how much money, we pull off the shelf or that we lose in taking action like this. We're going to do what's right. And to this day, how that was dealt with was just beyond marvelous. Your thoughts? Because I know you remember during those times too.
I do. Unfortunately, Andre, J&J is not following that blueprint lately.
Right.
With some things that they've caused. So talk about crises that companies and leaders cause. They're not following that. But, yeah, that was a great example.
Yeah.
Hey, let me give you a couple other ones here.
Sure.
Give you a couple other ones. Just last August, when we had those hurricanes toward the end of August there, the New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania governors, I thought, had outstanding responses. They were constantly on the news. And even the mayor of, Philadelphia, close to where I live, and the mayor of New York City, these folks provided constant updates, reminders, almost threats. Like I go back to Governor Christie of New Jersey, and his comments, he says, I'm watching TV, and you people on the beach, you've maximized your tan. Get the hell off the beach.
And I think he literally said just those exact words.
Yes, in fact, they're on T-shirts now. Yes, that's on T-shirts now. His leadership and that of the governor of New York was just outstanding. In that they were visible, they updated you, constant communication. So that's one. The last one I'll throw out to you. You remember Apollo 13?
Yep.
There's movies, there's leadership courses around all this, and they rallied around that one theme of failure is not an option. And this was a team of a lot of people that got together and said, we're going to bring these guys home safe, because that was touch and go. That was touch and go. More touch than go sometimes. And, the response there was great, too.
Yeah, those are some very, very good examples, and it kind of leads me to the next topic and this whole idea of what type of attribute would signal to you that would be the best attribute in dealing with a crisis. And there's many attributes, and believe me, I'm not one that says one attribute is the best, a one-size-fits-all way of responding or type of behavior that one needs to have towards a crisis, but oh boy, we have a question. Hold on for a second. We have somebody calling in. I don't want to ignore our caller, but let me go ahead. It's calling from 215. 215, you got a question? Go ahead.
Hi, yes. This is Amanda, and I do have a question. It's an interesting conversation about avoiding conflict, and I'm just curious in regards, you gave some great examples, Walter, from a national standpoint, so I'm just curious in a corporate setting. As you know, a lot of companies and organizations over the past year or maybe 2 years have went through a lot of downsizing. And so I'm just curious, both you and Andre, your thoughts on how do you manage that? Because I know I've been part of the communication and the crisis management process, and there's certain things that you only tell your employees, obviously, so you don't see a mass exodus or actually a mass revolt. And also, to what level of extent do you hold things back? Because then I've also had people come up to me and say, we feel we're not part of this anymore. We don't know what's going on, and it's like, how do you manage that balance?
Amanda, first of all, thanks for bringing us back into the corporate world here, because that's important. Yeah, I really appreciate your question. Oh, boy. Andre, you want to go with this one first?
Well, I think it goes back to what you said earlier, and that's, and it's probably need to emphasize it even more, this whole idea of communication. And ensuring that everybody's on the same page. One of the things I found, the same situation, especially when it's dealing with corporate America, and typically the companies that do it best, make sure that before a crisis even happens, they understand the playbook of what needs to take place from a communication standpoint in dealing with the crisis, which means there's one person speaking, and there's one person providing the direction, and then everybody else sings off the same sheet of music as that person so that you have a consistent message. But oftentimes, per Amanda's question, is the fact that, a lot of times you have different people having different ways and feelings and understanding of how to deal with the particular crisis, and then what happens is nobody understands what the correct direction is, because you're getting it from so many different types of avenues from so many different types of people. So to me, it's one person, one voice would kind of best manage that situation. I don't know, your thoughts, Walter, on that question?
Yeah, and Andre, I also heard in Amanda's question. Amanda, please continue to chime in here. Not saying something, going back to the first thing I said, silence is not golden.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
However, there are times when the leader can't say something, particularly if this is a publicly traded company and there's shareholders out there. And I do remember one of the leaders in one of the companies that I worked with many years ago in the pharmaceutical industry, even said to us, look, folks, I can say but so much. We do have shareholders right now. You know, what I can tell you need to do is continue to do your job. I like that type of communication because it's telling me a couple things. One, there is some talk that we all should be aware of. We're all adults, you know, and we have the now and the future. We have families, and, you know, we have careers. And it's good that a leader could be forthright in at least saying that. And secondly, he's saying, well, I can't tell you anything now, but when I can tell you, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell all of you at the same time. So there's not that mixed message, and it's not that phenomena, you know, we do exercises around this where one person passes along the message, 15 people later, the message is totally distorted.
Right.
So
yep.
I think if you can't say something, say you can't say it.
Right.
And let them know when you can say it.
And Walter, that's a great point. But and I've seen leaders do that. I've also seen leaders then at the point where they are ready to say something that they tap dance around the whole entire topic, and where employees leave that room, that meeting room, and they're more clueless than when they entered it.
Yeah.
And to me, I feel that there's more of that going on with leadership because it's a matter of wanting to avoid that conflict or hitting that issue right on the nail.
Yeah. You know, it's hard. And I've never done it personally, but I have to imagine it's hard to tell people that you like their performance, you trust them, but you have to tell them, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to make some changes, which means you may not have a job. That's got to be gut-wrenching.
Right.
You know? And so
especially during a situation like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So on one hand, I have empathy for leaders, but on the other hand, to Amanda's point, people need to know when you can tell them what's going on. They really do.
And I think the reason why that's such a great point is because I don't think you want to leave it up to the receiver's point of view of what's taking place, because you know that also happens too. When there's silence, then there's assumptions that are made, and typically the assumptions make what the fact is worse, such as if it's silence, then that means, oh man, everything's hitting the fan and this roof is going to cave in on us, when that's actually probably not reality. The reality is we're thinking through what needs to take place. So everything is still calm. So again, it goes back to your beginning point, Walter. Silence oftentimes leaves assumptions to all of us, and typically those assumptions are probably not the best assumptions. So
yeah, and you know what they say about that word assume, right?
Absolutely.
And you know about rumors, particularly salespeople.
Right.
Salespeople can spread rumors quickly than anybody I know.
And better than many of them.
Yeah.
Go ahead, go, Walter.
And some of those rumors actually come true, which I found fascinating when I left sales and went inside. Say, Amanda, any other thoughts here?
Any thoughts, Amanda?
No, that was good input, so I appreciate your guys' feedback on that.
Hey, well, thanks for your question. It was a great one, and thanks for bringing us back to corporate, too. Appreciate it.
Thanks for calling in, Amanda. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. What is your thoughts on it? Kind of goes back to, you know, this whole idea of, you know, the steely approach in terms of, you know, handling, you know, a crisis. Are there any attributes you would say are the best attributes? And again, I know this is I've already answered my question on this because I'm not sure there's a one-size-fits-all, but is there a particular attribute that you would say, Walter, this would probably be the closest I can think is the best attribute in order to address a crisis?
I think you got to remain calm. My father didn't. Whenever something went wrong, he flew off the handle. Mm-hmm. My mother was the opposite. And so thankfully, I followed what I saw my mother do. And because I saw my father fly off the handle, I said, now, when I'm confronted with those sudden surprises that aren't pleasant, which some people could call a crisis, I'm at least going to remain calm so I can begin to think, how are we going to get out of this? Mm-hmm. So I do think being calm is different from being steely and aloof.
Right.
Because once you're calm and people see that, then hopefully they can remain calm, and then you can move to the other side of it, where it's solving it, coming up with, some way to get through it.
I cannot think of a better attribute in terms of what you mentioned than the role of a president of the United States. And I don't want to move this show and this conversation into politics, but I would say if there's probably any attribute that if you're vying to be president of this country, you need to have that. Your ability, and as you mentioned, not necessarily to be steely or silent, but your ability to have this behavior almost exude out of your skin in terms of, looking the part in terms of I have everything under control. And I don't want to say it's as far as having it, Walter, because I hate when people say having it, because they always ask, okay, what is it?
Yeah.
But I think and I think the folks that are listening know what I'm alluding to, is just having the ability to have everybody understand, Walter's got it under control. He's not saying much right now. He's telling us, what we need to hear in terms of what's going on. But I'm fine with what he's told us because I can see just from his presence, he has it under control. And you see people that, even you're looking on TV and you say to themselves, I hear what they're saying, but I'm not confident they know what they're doing. You know what I'm saying, Walter? It's kind of like they're trying their best to keep us, calm, but the way they're exuding and the way they're, I guess I don't know if I want to say posture, but how they're coming across is not leading me to believe that they have everything under control. You know where I'm going with that, Walter?
Yeah. Yeah, you've probably seen. It sounds like you've seen several examples of that.
Yeah, you see that, and like I said, I'm not bringing any names up from a person who's the most notable or in the news all the time, but you see it all the time in terms of what's coming out of their mouth is not necessarily what's taking place from a nonverbal standpoint, when you can say to somebody, you know what, that person's not saying much, but I'm confident they have everything under control. And it kind of goes back to that whole idea of, I'm not sure you teach that. That's just somebody who has been probably, and I would say, gone through so many of these type of things. They understand how to not only know how to act within relationship to that crisis, but they know how to dignify and demonstrate leadership from a nonverbal standpoint to make sure that everybody that's witnessing how they're doing is under control. And let's face it, if I'm looking for you or look to you for leadership and we're in crisis, I'm quite frankly, as a recipient observer, sitting back and looking at how you're dealing with this situation, and I'm taking notes. I'm saying, okay, I didn't like the way that was said. Okay, why are they in their office with the door closed and the shades down? What's going on? So, I'm saying it's a lot of times it's how it's come across from a nonverbal standpoint. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think particularly silence, gets interpreted, in a very negative way. And absence. Going back to 9/11, one of the things I remember that day was we didn't hear from President Bush for a while, and several hours passed. And the understanding afterward was, well, they were trying to make sure that he was safe, and they couldn't tell us so much about what they were trying to do to ensure his safety. And then he did surface later on that day. It became a lot more visible afterward. But I remember people speculating, well, where's the president? Where is he? We're not hearing from him.
We've got some calls, Walter, so we want to get these calls in before we do out of time. So this call is actually coming from the 901 area code. 901, you got a question?
I sure do. Hi, Andre. This is Katrina Singletary. How are you?
Hey, Katrina, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. And hello to your guest, too. Walter, how are you today?
Hi, Katrina. Nice to have you.
Oh, good. Thank you so much. I just have a quick question. Well, first of all, I am so enjoying the show. And secondly, my question is, I'm an educator, and we've had this debate in my class before. are leaders born or are they made?
Oh,
and,
good.
Yeah, and that is going to sum up a lot of things, I think, in this conversation, because, you really don't know what to do in times of crisis. If it's not already ingrained in you, I would say, because I'm more leaning towards they're born that way, and that's naturally there. But if you have been taught or have not been taught, then you will tend to, I would say, kind of screw everything up. But I don't really know. I just wanted you guys to weigh in on that. Are leaders born or are they made? And what happens in times of crisis, for each, I guess. I don't know how to really put that.
Boy, Patrina, that brought up the age-old question here, which I love.
Yeah.
And, I've heard both sides of that argue 10 ways to Sunday, and no one's ever come up with a definitive yes or no. Or, yeah. I tend to fall in the camp that leaders are made. And I think it's with experience, and it's with sometimes failure, right? It could come from, like in my case, I was the oldest child. And so when both parents worked and they left us home, I was a latchkey kid before that term was ever uttered, but I had to take care of my younger brother and sister, right? And so I think things like that can certainly prepare you to be a leader, but sometimes this experience that kind of teaches you, and sometimes failure can teach you, well, I should have done that differently, and next time I get into a situation, I'm going to do it differently. Andre, how do you feel about that?
As always, and this is probably a lack of a leadership skill on my part, but as always, I take a very pragmatic approach to that question, and I always say I think it's on both ends, because I look at a situation like this, and I break it up into two columns. I first say it's born because from an attribute standpoint, I just think there are some people that just have this gift to be able to be under control from a behavior standpoint when they're in the midst of something like of a crisis. They don't panic. And I think some people just have that, and I think some people just have, the natural ability just to panic. So I do agree with that standpoint. Now, I think leaders are made in terms of, okay, now once I'm under control, what am I going to do? And I totally agree with you, Walter. I think it comes back on experiences. If something is familiar to me and I'm going through that same situation, I know what to do. And to me, that's just going through the experience and understanding, okay, I've learned best practices on how to deal with this situation or this challenge, and so I have the answers of knowing what to do because now it's confronting me again. So I'm kind of in between the two where I say it's boring because people say, okay, I'm not going to panic because that's just not who I am, and I'm going to deal with this in a very, I guess, polished and a very, I don't know if I want to say smooth, but a very graceful standpoint as opposed to panicking versus somebody's, oh my goodness, what's going on? I don't know what to do here, and causing that kind of fervor. But I believe on the other hand, there's people that can recognize, you know what, I've been through this, I've been and done this type of approach, I know how to handle it. So I'm almost teetering between the two from a pragmatic standpoint, but that's kind of how I am.
Yeah. But, that was really a really good point because especially when you said that, in essence, there is some validity to the fact that, they can be born with it, but still the teachings, they will still need the lessons there to kind of help further develop what they were already born with. So I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's a very good point. So I do thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so very much, and I'll be sure and tell my students.
Thank you so much, Patrina.
Thank you, Patrina.
Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We've got another question for you, Walter. The lines are lighting up. This one's coming from, let's see, area code 6. Let's see here. I'm getting 631. I got you here. My switchboard was messing up a little bit. 631, you got a question, area code?
Yes. Hi. My name. This is Jay Works. My real name Antonio. And I was
Hey,
just
Antonio.
How you doing, sir? I just wondering. I was wondering if one failed in leadership, was in a leadership position and failed. Is there any way for one to develop better leadership, or at what point do you say cut the person off and say, well, you can never really make it as one, or is there something like that you can do? Or
well, you are talking to the master, Walter. That's all yours.
Oh boy,
great question, Antonio. Go ahead, Walter.
Yeah, Tony, I appreciate the question. I think that's where you, as a coach of this person, you're observing them, just not. And I heard you say sales, so let's say sales. Just not how well they sell, just not how they bring in the sales results or their numbers, but do you get a chance to put them in positions where, say, they're coaching others, maybe in their division or district? Are they training? Are they in front of your group, presenting, how the whole group should do something? So you try to assess how they could be as a future leader by putting them in some leadership positions when they're not a leader. And then you can do this thing, and Antonio, you may have been with us when we talked about a simulation. It's like a management simulation where they go, off for 2 or 3 days, and you put them through different things as if they were a manager. You give them a case study, you give them a conflict situation, you give them everything that leaders and people leaders and managers tend to do, and then you sit back and evaluate, based on some criteria, how well they did, and then you can give them some coaching. So you can do that ahead of time to hopefully, and this is not foolproof, to hopefully get a sense of how they would be an effective leader.
Well, thank you very much. That's all I had to say. Bye.
Thanks for calling in, Antonio. Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah.
We've got another call. So they're calling. I think this one is coming from a Skype because it's not obviously a recognizable number. So, but let me see. Next caller, you got a question?
Yeah, that must be me, huh?
How you doing, Joe?
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Got a question?
Well, you're talking about crisis in the sales profession. Do you think crises occur very, very quickly, or do you think that they accumulate over time to become a crisis?
Oh.
Yeah, Joe, I think you have either or both. Sometimes you have the very unexpected crisis, and sometimes you have mini crises that build up into a big one, especially if you don't take action, or you're silent, and you don't take any action, and you let it build, and it grows, and then the rumors add to it. And all of a sudden, then you got a big crisis, maybe bigger than you should have had.
Yeah, for me, a crisis would be if people aren't selling, or if there's such disharmony amongst the sales team that, they're getting on each other's nerves and they're affecting each other's performance.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I've seen that.
Yeah.
To me, the crisis could be avoided at the very beginning, at the time of application.
Yeah.
I remember when I had to take a psychology test, and I was surprised that the results were actually fairly accurate about my mentality and attitude. So I believe in them. And I think that more people, especially if you're going to invest money in your sales team, that you should do it. I've been in plenty of places where they just hire the first pair of tonsils that walks in. And that's not good.
I like that.
So, yeah, Andre?
No, it's such a great point, and I tell you, it's actually leading me to another show that I'm going to be getting. But how many times have you seen people that are in leadership roles purposely avoid an issue that turns out to be a crisis? And you see it all the time, especially in sales. And I'll give you an example. It's dealing with an employee who's either disruptive or, like you said, Joe, that's probably not getting the sales, and it's spoiling the whole apple cart in terms of everybody else's ability to do their job. But they avoid it. Either they try to minimize it, or they don't deal with it head on, I guess is what I'm saying, from a direct standpoint. They just try to minimize it, and then guess what happens? It turns into a crisis. You see that all the time. I'm sure, Walter, you've seen that in your career in sales, where the person who's in charge for whatever reason, wants to avoid the quote-unquote bad employee.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, that bad employee becomes the, I guess I hate to use this term, but they become the cancer in the group, and all of a sudden now you got a crisis on your hands. So yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, can I answer that?
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Because my answer is different. My experience is different. Is that I've come across plenty of people who love to micromanage, and the people who are bad for the team, besides their not having the talent and not being developed along the way by the sales manager, is the sales manager. I have worked with so many freaking idiots who didn't know how to sell, who didn't know how to manage, but because they now had the power, they were going to impose their particular philosophies of what I hate, what I consider the worst cancer outside of bad employees who just don't have the aptitude and allows the aptitude, is the numbers game. I can't stand anybody who says sales is nothing but a numbers game. I just want to take them by the throat and mash them.
Yeah.
The numbers game is such a myth. That's the product of lazy and stupid people. If you're in sales for 2 years as a manager, if you still believe that sales is nothing more than a numbers game, you are the crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. Good. Well said.
I know you want to jump all over that, Walter, because I agree with that totally, and you see that too all the time.
Good summation there, Joe. Yeah, well, I can't add anything more than what Joe just said. Well said.
Hey, Joe. Listen, thank you so much for calling in. We're down to 3 minutes left in the show, and
yeah,
so
Joe,
good to hear from you, Joe. Thanks a lot, buddy. I want to make sure that Walter provides everybody what he's doing. If you want to contact Walter, I have Walter give his information. But Walter, we're going down the last couple minutes, so if you can let everybody know what you're doing and things that you got cooking in the piper, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Andre, and great topic, great show. The questions were wonderful. What I really would help a lot of people with is just not the crisis management, but the leadership, just not sales either, the leadership training and development that can help you handle just not the crisis, but help you do things like grow and develop your people so that they can get the numbers. To Joe's point, if that's all you're talking about is numbers, you're not talking about, well, how do I develop their competencies and their skills, you're missing the boat. And if you're not caring enough about your people in terms of where their career is going and how they're going to get there, these are the types of things that I constantly talk about, train on, consult on, and would love to, have any conversation with anyone about.
Walter?
Yes,
thank you so much for being on the show, my man.
It's my pleasure.
This is the second time we have you on the show. We have to get you back on again, and there's going to be other subjects that we're going to be talking about, subjects right in your wheelhouse. So thanks a lot for being on the show. And I think we're getting down to the last point of the show, and we're down to a minute left in the show. So for those of you who are listening to the show, I just want to remind you I do have an afterthought show tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock p.m., where I provide some thoughts on tonight's subject. So if you'd like to come back and listen to that show, that is, again, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock p.m., same time, Wednesday night, and it's called My Afterthought Show. And then, of course, next week's show, it's going to be a good one. We're going to be talking about corporate sales leaders who are failing miserably at a high rate. I've seen that be the case for some apparent reason, but a lot of corporate sales leaders are not doing well and are failing at a very, very high rate. So we're going to talk about that next week with a thought leader on the subject, too, as well. So with that, everyone, have a great rest of your evening, and thank you for listening to the Sales Professional Network. Thank you so much, Walter, too, as well.
Thank you, Andre. Glad to be here.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
Take care.